I received a question from Keith. Can you speak to the situation where wind-thrown trees are hanging over cars, heat pumps, fences, structures, etc.? We know that's part of the hazard assessment in the planning process, but what rules of thumb do you suggest regarding an approach to preserve what's underneath? First thing to do when dealing with storm debris and structures or property damage is to plan efficiently to minimize any more residual damage to the property or items. Don't attempt to just cut and run. You must plan completely to mitigate risks.
Every cut that you make, you have to essentially create a new plan.
Looking for those right rigging points, to be able to lift or to drift wood off of. And there's time we can speed line stuff off of a house that we've done before. Every job's different. You just got to approach it and come up with 2 or 3 different plans. And in case something's not going to work out right, we look for another way to do it. But we've usually got a couple different plans in our head just in case. But just like any tree that we're going to just climb and take down, we look at what is going to be the worst thing that can happen. If something doesn't go right, cutting this limb, what's the worst thing that can happen? We just automatically try to start working away from that from the get-go. If something happens, it's not going to be bad. We look for the worst that can happen and work away from that. And if we can do that each time, everything usually works out pretty good.
Someone told me years ago that most dangerous part of a storm is the cleanup process. Most are injured from incidents that take place in the cleanup rather than the storm itself.
The first thing that, I would do is, we roll up on sites like that is, obviously start looking for obstacles and hazards. What can we move out of the way? And, what's there, is there power lines on the house? Is there power lines down? There's the safety aspects first of that. I would look for, let's say if it's a house, how much of the tree has gone through the house. When you go to look at the size of the tree, it can tell you what kind of equipment you're going to need when you come out there to the job site. 6 foot in diameter oak on a house, you're not going to get that off with a skid steers. You're going to need a crane or something like that, something big. But let's say that, you got a 20-inch pine laying on the house, you could easily, use pulleys and things like that, like the 50-and-1s to get that tree off of there. So there are ways that you can get a tree off a structure without using a crane. A crane's not always, the best move. You might not be able to get a crane back there or a crane on to the location. So sometimes you might have to come up with something and use rigging and things like that to get it done. Go out there, that's what I'll be mainly looking at. Where can I put pulleys at? What trees to the left or right of the house, or even sometimes in front, or wherever the tree's located, you start looking around, what can I use to get this tree off of here? And the main thing about that is if a tree is on a house, you're going to have to be on the roof, and most of the time. And so if you're going to be on the roof, you still have to be tied in. And so you got to be looking for trees and things like that. There was a tree in the front. There was a huge oak in the front yard. There was a huge oak in the backyard. And there was a pine laying on the house. So what I did was I ran a line, a 3/4 rope from the tree in the front yard to the tree in the backyard, and I pulled it real tight. I got a lot of tension on it. So I had a pulley and I was tied in off of, and I had a rope. And I was also using another rope to rig off of.
Larger trees and limbs will require use of rigging and other large equipment to handle the logs, limbs, and weight load on the supporting structures. Was uprooted and there was two main trunks and then a few small sprigs off of it or something.
There was another leland behind it. I put a block in it.
So that's the block going up in that other cypress or cedar.
Another Leland cypress. And we done one at a time.
Pivot points of support, or pivots in the plan, need to be analyzed and utilized to determine what steps can be taken to remove the tree from the structure. Hinges and notches can be used to control limb and trunk movement. It's often surprising how weight can be manipulated with the hinge use. Directions can be possible with added taglines and/or rigging. Planned for the standing tree. Hazards, lean, escape route, hinge size, then a back cut to achieve the planned placement location. If the tree cannot be felled or limb cut to that particular location, it would have to be taken down from the top. But a storm tree that has to be taken that's leaning over an object or structure has to be planned differently.
I'm already thinking once they send me pictures, okay, how can I rig this out of another tree? Can I get my bucket truck in there? If I can't get my bucket in, now I've got to climb something. Then it comes down, if there's no trees to rig out of, we'll then just do as much as we can. And then sometimes you have to get the crane to come in.
Trees not supported by a damaged structure need to be felled or removed to protect the structure and work area. This would be a tree or a large limb of a tree that's hanging towards an object or structure or hanging over the cleanup area. A standing tree or large horizontal tree with a large limb that's vertical needs to have a complete plan. You have to select an area that is wide enough and long enough to place it. Tree that's supported by the ground, we generally think about starting at the butt end and going to the top. But a tree that's supported by structure or hanging over a structure, then basically that's kind of the same process as you would do with thinking through a standing tree. You're doing just a top-down removal, and that's going from the top to the butt because you've got to be able to reduce weight. It may be that with the root system still attached, that you may be able to reduce top weight and it stands away from the structure, or that also assists you to be able to pull back from it if you use some type of rigging pull line. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's situations where you could start at the base and remove trunk, not applying pressure onto the roof line or car or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think, each situation is a little bit different. When I started out, training, and I learned from you, when we're felling a tree somewhere and then you want to start from the butt up, work up towards the crown, getting weight on the ground. And, as I started talking to people who respond to storm damage, and you have a tree that is crossing a road and the butt of the tree may be 30 or 40 yards in the woods. Obviously, they're just cleaning it out of the road. And so I had to rethink, how that worked. Instead of going into the woods and working the butt, that they're just going to leave there anyway. You're right. I mean, most of the time, if the root ball is still attached in some capacity, we evaluate what the possibility of that is to roll, because they're usually leaned up against something that's at a severe angle, like a roof, and the possibility of you removing weight, can this roll? And if they're still attached at the base, I mean, we work from the top down and, just every piece. I mean, with the big hardwood trees, or they are pines that had some form of like brown rot or something up the tree, and the wind blows and snaps it off. You see that a lot in pines. But so much weight on these hardwoods, you make a cut and that could be several thousand pounds, and you're changing the dynamic. So every time you reduce some weight, you better reevaluate everything. Every cut that you make, you have to essentially create a new plan.
But a storm tree that has to be taken that's leaning over an object or structure or laying on an object or structure has to be planned differently. Each cut has to be thought of as a horizontal tree that's supported by the ground, looking for any hazards, the possibility of side-to-side movement or roll up and down movement, back and forward, and then select a cut to be able to sever that location. However, working from the butt to the top is not a preferred method when dealing with structure-supported trees and limbs. Controlling weight and movement with rigging to support movement and control. So working from the top to the butt is the desired direction in this case.
Anytime I can take the bigger pieces out first, we always get the biggest one first. Even if I'm having to rig out of a smaller tree, we just take smaller pieces. Limbed it out with the bucket. To the far right, on the other side of the driveway, I had 2 blocks in that tree. I had one to the right and then one back behind it, almost straight behind it. Well, in fact, there was a tree that it broke out of. The rest of the stuff that was still standing, because that tree was about 3.5 foot diameter at the base. And there still was I bet there was still 70 foot of base still standing. And where that thing broke off at was still 2.5 foot across. Yeah, that whole roof was gone.
And start blocking that down, notches and hinges?
No, sir, because then you got to worry about that whole wall caving in on you. I mean, even if we'd have limbed that out, again, once you get to a certain point, if you can block it and get movement, because if you start cutting from the ground and like that one limb, it wasn't 6 inches long and it was about the size of a tennis ball, but that was just over the very top of the roof. And we had some spunk on that GRCS and it wouldn't budge. Made that one extra cut. I said, let me go back up and I told him, I said, this is the only thing that can be holding it. Once I cut it, it come on up to the left of your circle. Okay, well, yeah, that big piece of all that brick right there, I was holding it, pushing it back in, and it even told the homeowner that we put ribbon up all around, it was loose. And we always, one of the first things I do is mention the wall, and then I start looking for cracks, and I take pictures of all the cracks in that brick. And there's been sometimes, I tell the customer, there's a good chance that stuff's going to break on out.
Structure supporting the debris may also give way. Walls of concrete, brick, and wood are also capable of causing serious injury and death.
Every time you reduce some weight, you better reevaluate everything. Every cut that you make, you have to essentially create a new plan. We don't get on roofs we just don't put a guy up on a roof walking around with a chainsaw. It's just not safe. He may get on the roof by using a ladder, but we try in all cases to have a lifeline that's not attached to the tree that's actually being removed. It doesn't matter if you've got storm damage on the ground or you've got storm damage on a structure. Obviously, you have to get the thing that you're removing stable, and it can be very unstable. And the last thing you want to do is be attached to that. And just as, heavy weight that's up in the air, you want to get it down on the ground. And obviously, it's a lot of weight up on a house. You want to get that down on the ground, but getting it stable.
Don't attempt to just cut and run. You must plan completely. Trees and weight supported by objects can quickly drop, turn, roll, and cause injury or death to you or work area personnel. Notches and hinges are your friend when dealing with heavy and under pressure tree situations. Understand them and practice them to perfection. On a supported tree, each cut has to be thought of as a horizontal tree that's supported by the ground. You have to be looking for situations of pivots. On trees supported by the ground, working from the butt to the top is usually a preferred method. But trees that are supported, you must work similar to trees that would be taken completely down from a standing removal situation. The support has to be considered differently than that of trees close to the ground. More like a standing tree without a placement site long enough and wide enough. The supporting structure has to be protected so as not to cause more damage. We do that by looking at pivots and controlling weight and movement with rigging, so working from the top to the butt is the desired in this case. A standing tree or large horizontal tree with a large limb that's vertical needs to have a complete plan. You have to select an area that's wide enough and long enough to place it, and then start your plan to that particular location. These things should be planned for a standing tree. If the tree cannot be felled or limb cut to that particular location, it would have to be taken down from the top. The support has to be considered differently than that of trees close to the ground, more like a standing tree without a placement site long enough and wide enough. The supporting structure has to be protected so as not to cause more damage to it. We do that by looking at pivots and controlling weight and movement with rigging to support movement and control. So working from the top to the butt is the desired direction when removing supported trees. Is the weight and limbs supported on the structure? Is the root ball still holding up trunk and canopy weight? What angles to the support point is the tree? Is damage to the structure going to be minimized by the cuts made? Is rigging necessary to be able to lift weight off the structure to reduce damage and maintain a safe work area? Will the structure support workers safely on the roof? Are walls stabilized, adjacent trees stable, etc.? Don't create more accidents and injury with the cleanup removal process.